let's put it bluntly. If Notre Dame were to make the college football playoff and say they play a 1 seed, and say that's they're playing against a 1 seed against Georgia. Certainly, yes, Notre Dame is going to struggle offensively against a team like Georgia with a great athletes all over the field. A defensive line that, it's Georgia. So how much more do you have to say? Um, and a defense that has just really stymied a lot of the opponents that they've played throughout the season. So yeah, I do agree. But like I say, the good news is that, certainly there are teams in the college football playoff that are ahead of Notre Dame that you would like to see them stack up again, that could stack up against better than others. Georgia, I think, would be an interesting matchup because I think both of those teams, the strength certainly is their defense. I mean, Georgia fans right now are still arguing. If you go onto any Georgia message board, they're still arguing about who the quarterback is and who the quarterback should be and how much this quarterback should play versus how much that quarterback should play, and this and that and everything else. And I it sounds a whole awful lot about like what Notre Dame fans were talking about early on in the season. And so, I think, it wouldn't be the worst matchup in the world to see Georgia, because I just don't think Georgia run away with it on the offensive side of the football. I don't think they're good enough to run away with it on the offensive side of the football. And I think Notre Dame could stack up. It would be an interesting matchup at the very least. I don't know right now that I would want to see Notre Dame stack up against Ohio State the way that Ohio State is moving the ball and scoring. So I don't know. Again, there are so many different permutations and combinations, but as we see, I mean, just by default today, Notre Dame is at least one step closer to sneaking into the college football playoff for the sole purpose that Ohio State beat a team that's ahead of Notre Dame. If you ask my opinion, Ohio State will beat another team that's ahead of Notre Dame this coming Saturday. And all of a sudden, that's at least getting Notre Dame up to 6. If Georgia beats Alabama and Alabama has 2 losses, it's hard for me to think that an Alabama team with 2 losses is going to get in over Notre Dame. So there's 3. Certainly there's the point that was made today that Notre Dame went ahead and put 55 on Georgia Tech and dominated and didn't mess around in a way that they often do against lesser opponents, because they know that Georgia and Georgia Tech play next week. And if Georgia, only beats Georgia Tech 24-7, 31-7, whatever the situation is, then, against a common opponent, Notre Dame ends up looking pretty good, especially if Alabama goes ahead and beats Georgia and Notre Dame and Georgia are sitting there with 1 loss at the end of a season. I mean, against the only common opponent that they play, Notre Dame dominated, and maybe Georgia doesn't look quite as good. We'll see how that game goes next week. So, I think without, and now we're, sitting here checking off boxes of teams that won't be ahead of Notre Dame anymore. Michigan State and Michigan probably are 2 of those teams. I mean, and if Michigan goes ahead and beats Ohio State next weekend, then certainly Ohio State's that team. But regardless, one of those teams will have 2 losses. So Notre Dame is gonna, be right on the outside looking in. And when somebody stubs their toe, which always seems to happen, I think that I mean, I don't know. It would be a real, almost ridiculous, crazy thing to say that after what we saw at the beginning of the season, Notre Dame sneaks into the college football playoff after a championship weekend. It's something that looks more and more like it could be a reality, especially given that Oregon is going to play a ranked Utah team twice, probably before the end of the season. Once, I believe tonight. I'd have to check to see exactly when that game starts. And then in the Pac-12 championship. So I don't know. So Hello to the Bama fan that's in here. Okay, 10-1. That's good. All right, welcome to the Notre Dame stream. I don't know. I think we've rambled on. I mean, like I say, if you're just coming in here because you got done watching Alabama, or you just got done watching some of the 3:30 games that are still kind of wrapping up, welcome. This is the Notre Dame post game show on the voice of college football, and that's Mark Rogers TV. Thanks for joining me. Like I say, I'm Ben Belden. You can find me on Twitter at RealBBelden. I am a pretty regular guest on this particular post-game show, along with Nathan Erbach, who, like I say, can't be with us here this evening, simply because he was in attendance for Notre Dame. And that's kind of, if you know anything about Nathan, he lives in Las Vegas. So anytime he gets to go out to Notre Dame, that's going to be a big thing for him. So, happy for him getting to do that. And, and like I say, I've carried the load of this post-game show solo this week. So certainly I've appreciated your comments throughout the show. It's certainly difficult to get behind a microphone and talk for 43 minutes when you don't have anybody necessarily to talk to. So thank you for your comments, and thank you for helping kind of keep this show going. So the last thing I'll say as I kind of get to about the 45-minute mark, if I don't get any more comments, we'll kind of wrap up with this thought. And I was kind of saving it for the end on purpose, that, I made mention of, this was a particularly interesting game in terms of the fact that, Notre Dame, it was their senior day today. And I guess I'll leave with the sentiment that, really, I don't know which of the, some of these seniors that were announced today could come back for another year as a graduate student, because they've got a year of eligibility left. Notre Dame doesn't really differentiate between leaving and going and that type of stuff. They really use senior day, and Brian Kelly said this, and I think the way he put this week was kind of the appropriate way to put it. He was asked if there was ever any thought about honoring Notre Dame football players who were juniors but would be leaving and moving on to the NFL or transferring or whatever the situation is. And he said really the spirit of senior day is honoring these guys who are getting their degrees from Notre Dame. And so certainly, some of the guys today, have chances to come back. Some of the guys that weren't honored today also won't be back. There's a lot of question marks. And when it comes to, personnel, I think Nathan and I talked last week about how, theoretically Jarrett Patterson could come back for another year if he wanted to, really solidify himself as the best center in college football. I mean, that's kind of a stretch, but certainly there are some guys when you got a team as good as Notre Dame and as deep as Notre Dame, and there are going to be guys that are unhappy with the snaps they're getting, and they're going to look to transfer and go elsewhere. So regardless, the guys that were honored today, and you think about, certain specific ones, Kurt Heinisch, a 60-year guy at Notre Dame, certainly has put in time, and has been a main staple of what Notre Dame's done on the defensive line for, it's seemingly forever now. And, guys like, I don't know, like I say, I mentioned Jarrett Patterson, and even, Josh Lugg, who's been a guy who came to Notre Dame, and, we've certainly had our criticisms of Josh Lugg and what he's done this year, but has just been a solid Notre Dame player and really done what was asked of him, and got a chance to start his whole senior year. And even into the graduate transfer type guys like Kane Madden and Jack Cohn. Jack Cohn came in and was one of those guys that, he certainly had a ton of criticism, and certainly endured a lot as people called for Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner at different points in the season. Somebody earlier made the point that they were glad that Notre Dame was able to stick with Jack Cohn throughout the season, because he's really blossomed into, a really nice quarterback for Notre Dame. And I can't seem to find that now. It was Johnny Bays, who I know has kind of since signed off there. But, Notre Dame was able to develop an offense, like Johnny was saying here in this comment, that he's glad that we stuck with Cone and developed the offense around the things that he does. I think he hit the nail on the head there. That the Jack Cone came into a situation where one of the most criticized people in the world behind the president is the Notre Dame quarterback. It seems like so. Came into a position where Notre Dame needed him to kind of be the carryover guy for Tyler Buckner or I guess Drew Pine or somebody else or a transfer for next year. And he stepped in there. He did that. And, certainly we thank him for that. And then really, to kind of cap this off, I guess, you got to feel good for Myron Tungavailoa Amosa and the things that he was able to do getting into the end zone on senior day. Was certainly probably the highlight in terms of feel good moments for the season. You got to feel great for the kid. He's put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, getting into the end zone in his last game at South Bend, especially after enduring the loss of his father earlier this year. Forcing a fumble against Toledo, which really kind of capped that game just the week after, I believe, that his father had passed away. Certainly Myron Tungavailoa Amosa will be one of those names that goes down in Notre Dame lore, for a very long time because of his, and even his mother mentioned it. He loves Notre Dame. He loves the university. He loves his professors, his teammates, his coaches. Just an overall great guy. So,